We just won a Super Bowl, and our dietitian, who's one of the best, who was giving me his honest take on the best way to build a meal plan, is using a pencil on a piece of paper. So I'm like, oh my God, man, there's something to go solve here. I got on the phone, I called 50 dietitians, and I said, hey, what are your top 3 problems? And the big assumption I had going into those conversations was dietitians, A, don't like building meal plans. B, it's because they take way too long, despite them being really effective. Through those 50 calls, it's very evident that those are both true. 2 months into that process, I decided to leave the team and found Notemeal. What we did is we talked to these dietitians and we said, hey, it's going to be $5,000 for a 1-year subscription to Notemeal. And, 45 dietitians said no, and 5 said yes. We went from about doing $50,000 in that first year to about $250,000 in recurring revenue in the 6 months that followed. In my head, I'm looking at the space, I'm like, are we really going to get this thing to $100 million a year in revenue with just one product? And the answer is no. The answer is we're going to need to build more products. When we went through the acquisition 3 years ago, we had 3 products. Today, we got 16 products. I would love to see the world start to embody how athletes are treating human performance and just have that brought and trickle down into the general consumer population. We got to figure out how to make that happen.
Sean, it's a pleasure to see you. I wanted to do this discussion for a while now. You're leading one of the most exciting teams out there with Teamworks. But let's just start with the prehistory. What have you been doing beforehand? I believe you studied computer science, so let's start there.
Yeah, first off, Kyriakos, it's great to be on here. It's funny, before we obviously kind of bumped into each other in the business landscape, I'd stumbled on Terra. I think on like Twitter, man. And I was like, oh my
Nice.
God, you guys are doing what we've been trying to do with the Patriots, which is build all these integrations with all these hardware devices. So kudos to you guys and the team for addressing a really exciting problem, right? Which is consolidating all kind of the integration layer for all these wearables. So super, super cool. Pumped to be on. But yeah, man, my story starts, undergrad. I was a Tufts University undergrad. I played football and baseball. I say I played football and baseball. I was a football guy. I was on the baseball team for 2 years, and I walked away before I embarrassed myself because I was just hiding out at right field, trying not to drop fly balls and doing my best to hit the ball. Right. I studied computer science undergrad there. So I think I was this weird mix. I was probably the only guy in the engineering building that was wearing his football thigh pads to computer science lab just so I could make it out in practice on time, right? So it was balancing sports and engineering is kind of a metaphor for the next 10 years, right? I graduated in 2014 and tried starting a bunch of companies, and this was when like Uber was the cool thing, right? Everybody wanted to go build this transportation tech app and tried starting a bunch of stuff. Nothing really stuck. Actually worked on a unique product in the transportation space, trying to build a real-time marketplace for boat slips. I was like 22, living with my parents at the time. Like, long story short, fell totally flat in my face there. Never made $1, but built a pretty cool product. So quickly, the lesson is, you build a product in a vacuum and you don't talk to customers. Like, that's not a recipe for success. So, dusted the knees off. From that, got an opportunity to go work at Google, and I joked that my tenure at Google lasted for about a day. I took that job, and the day after I took the job, my football coach at Tufts called me up, and he said, "Hey, the New England Patriots are looking for a scouting analyst." And I said, "Well, that's great, Jay. Send me over the resume, and I'll share it with some of the guys I graduated with because I don't want to work in scouting, right?" And he said, "Well, no, I told them you do the interview." So I'm sitting here like, "What are we doing? Like, what am I in for?" So I go do the interview with the Patriots, and the interview process was really interesting. I was basically interviewing with a bunch of coaches and scouts, and they were showing me game film of guys playing football. And I was like, the whole time in the back of my head, I'm like, I want to go write code. I want to build software, right? So I get to kind of the end of that, and it's me and Coach Belichick, and he's we're kind of having this awkward. I'm like, why am I here? And he's like, waiting for me to talk. And I said, well, listen, Bill, I first of all, I appreciate all the time here. This has been great. I got to be upfront with you. I don't want to be a scout, and I don't want to work in personnel or scouting. And he kind of looked at me and smirked, and he said, that's okay. We don't want you to be a scout. I just wanted to make sure you knew football because we want to bring you in and we want you to build the software team here. So I I ripped the Google job up in a nice manner that the recruiter was not happy. However, I took the job with the Patriots, took a big pay cut, took a bit of an entrepreneurial journey to go start the team, Golden Software Patriots. I was there for about 4 years, so from 2015 to 2019, and through that stretch, we were fortunate enough to play in 3 Super Bowls, and we won 2 Super Bowls. And I joked that I was the least important person on the team, right? I was the guy in the back of the building, in my room with the lights off, writing code all day. We had a 5-person team. And we were building applications for the personnel department, really to objectively evaluate talent.
Can we go there a bit? What kind of technologies teams are using or were using then? Like, would you say that technology is a very big part of Patriots and like many other teams as well? Or would you say that it's a lot of lagging there in terms of technology?
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, you definitely. I think the most eye-opening thing for me when I was there was how far advanced we were on the adoption curve of some of the pieces of hardware, really. Also software, but talking hardware and physical things. Um, you know, for example, right? We worked a lot with um, certain devices. Like we have these float tanks, right? I don't know if you're familiar with the concept, but it's an Epsom salt bath, right? So you're laying down in this big, massive, like picture like the size of your bedroom, full of Epsom salt water, right? You get in there and you float. The lights are totally off, and it's sensor deprivation, right? So helps to calm the parasympathetic nervous system. That technology, we actually stumbled on that from some connections that the Patriots organization had with folks in the DoD, right, in the special operations space. So that technology was pretty new. I think the team was had adopted that before I had gotten there, right? But that was a really, really just I had never even heard of that, right? Some other things we were doing at the time. Again, sleep tracking was kind of in its infancy, but lots of different devices were being used to track sleep, right? And when you talk about first order kind of inputs and second order inputs to how you're going to perform, I mean, we know sleep, how important sleep is, right? So monitoring that closely was a big kind of
And tactically, what was it that the players were wearing a device and then you were aggregating the data and giving recommendations, or how were you doing that?
It was a lot of coaching, right? There's a lot of and you get into some interesting privacy area, right? Where some athletes and players don't want you to see the data, right? Some folks listening, right? You might not realize that data can be weaponized, right? If players aren't taking care of themselves and there's objective data proving they're not taking care of themselves, that probably is going to come up in contract conversations, right? So we need to be careful about who has access to that data and how we're using it, right? In the best case, it's a coach sitting down, it's a head of performance sitting down with the player and saying, "Hey, man, looks like you're not sleeping. How can we help here? What's going on?" And usually that player's got something that's preventing him from sleeping. We've seen everything from substance abuse to time zone changing is a huge thing, right? That just the circadian rhythm and the stress induced from that. Or folks just thinking 6 hours of sleep is enough time to recover as a professional athlete, or you're eating, you're not getting your dinner in 3 hours before bed, right? You're eating right before bed and you're eating a big fatty meal where your body's metabolizing that instead of shutting down the sympathetic nervous system, right? So you see all these opportunities to coach these players up in the best case. And in that case, we're changing behavior, we're increasing performance, right? In the worst case, right, that the head coach or the GM is seeing that information. They're saying this guy doesn't care, right? He's not putting in what we're asking to put in, and we're going to penalize him for it, right? So it's a really interesting area that that data is used differently in that area than it is, say, in a consumer space. But there are some parallels there, right? You think about how some of the sleep data or the nutrient intake data, hypothetically, or blood work data could be utilized by an insurance company. It's similar, right? A doctor can use that data, right? Or a performance specialist working with, I don't know, me, right? Could use that data to help drive behavior change so I can perform better day to day. I mean, I'm just sitting, I'm getting up in the morning, working on my computer and trying to do the best that I can, right? But I also, um, I also am subject to my insurance company taking that data. And if I'm for instance, a cigarette smoker, like I've never touched a cigarette, nor would I. But if I'm a cigarette smoker and my insurance company sees that and they can penalize me, right? Like my premiums are going up, right? And in some cases they should. In other cases, there are things that are outside of our control that are environmental factors we can't control, where insurance companies could adjust premiums based off of that information, right? So they're kind of there are some parallels there. But it's maybe I'm trying apples and oranges here, but it's really interesting to see both spaces and how the privacy concerns kind of arise.
Super. And then after your journey with Patriots, I believe you started your own business. How did the idea came?
Yeah, so it's a great question. While we were again with the club, the Patriots, a lot of the first kind of 3 years of work was on the personnel side. So just for some background context, right? We got really good at taking objective player data like broad jump or vertical jump or horizontal jump, 40-yard dash, taking that data and building a logistic regression model to predict whether or not those players were going to make rosters and if they were going to play in games. So you could do a lot with that, right? You could sort guys based off of their athleticism. You could look at the undrafted free agents and see who we should sign and bring in for camp bodies. So anyway, we tried a number of things. I mean, this is how it goes with some of the data science stuff, right? You try 50 things and one works, and that's a big win, right? Some of the other work I started to get into was on the human performance side at the intervention front, right? So we wanted to go look at this performance data and look at what was being prescribed to athletes, and talked a lot with strength and conditioning, and what tools are we using to build workouts, right? Go to talk to our dietitian at the time, Ted Harper, and I said, "Hey Ted, this is how the story goes, right?" I said, "Hey Ted, how are you building meal plans for these guys? And in fact, could you build me one? I'd love to go try to put 10 pounds on, because if the wind blows too hard, I might blow away, because I lost 30 pounds since I was playing football," right? So I asked Ted for a meal plan, and he calmly got out his notebook and a pencil, and he started writing out some stuff on paper. And I was like, "Man, is that how you're doing that?" And he's like, "Yeah, man, look, this is the exchange system, and this comes from diabetes research, and I know you need 3,000 calories, and I can give you 5 starch exchanges, and I can distribute those across each meal, and that's your blueprint for your meal plan." And that was again kind of the so-called light bulb moment where I was like, "Man, we just won a Super Bowl, right?" And our dietitian, who's one of the best, if not the best, at his job, in his trade, in his industry, and also a great friend of mine, who is giving me his honest take on the best way to build a meal plan is using a pencil and a piece of paper, right? So I'm like, "Oh my God," right? You put the computer science hat on, the product hat on, and you're like, "Man, there's something to go solve here," right? So from that point forward, I set out and I just tried talking. I mean, for those listening in product or at a tech company, like the best thing you can do at any given time is just to talk to people, right? Just to have as many conversations. You get this, Kyriakos, right? It's like, just talk to people and they'll tell you their problems happily, right? So I got on the phone, I called 50 dietitians across the collegiate, professional, and military in the US, and I said, "Hey, like, what are your top 3 problems?" And the big hypothesis, or the assumption I had going into those conversations was, um, dietitians, A, don't like building meal plans. However, B, it's because they take way too long, despite them being really effective, right? So there's like a two-part assumption. And the whole point of the 50 calls is to basically prove that wrong, right? And through those 50 calls, it's very evident that those are both true, right? And so it's kind of like you can approach product in different ways, but had enough conviction where 2 months into that process, I decided to leave the team in April of 2019 and found Notemeal. And the focus was to build a software platform to allow dietitians, sports dietitians specifically, to build meal plans and education content for players.
So why did you focus at the beginning to sports dietitians and not the players themselves? Because usually the approach that everybody would be doing would be exactly the opposite.
Yeah, and you know what? It's really and you see a lot of. Let me preface this with I think a lot of folks take that approach, especially in the elite athletic space, because they know, right, that the value is created, right, in athletics, right. The value is created by the athlete. Right? They are the source of the entertainment and the performance. Everything else in that market is capturing the value, right, created by the athlete, right. So naturally, it make the most sense to go, "Hey, we're gonna go build a nutrition app for NFL athletes," right. That could be the focus, right. What I had seen in the context I had been operating on was, hey, these athletes are actually surrounded with a team of performance specialists, right? And their job is to optimize the athlete, right? It's not, yes, it's the athlete's job to optimize themselves and to take steps in the right direction. but it's the only place in the world, right? It's the only market in the world where you've got 10 to 15, if not 20 full-time specialists working to get you to perform better, right? So instead of attacking the athlete, we said, hey, right, let's go attack the practitioner, right? Augment their ability to influence the athlete, and let's focus on them as the persona, and let's build software to make them more efficient. And part of that too was looking at, you're again back to putting the product hat on, right? B2C software is like B2B software on hard mode, right? It's much harder. It's just difficult, right? If you hit it, you hit it, right? But B2B software, you can talk to fewer end users, you can get more signal. There are bigger contracts you can go get with the organizations, and it's a different sales motion, right? So I think, and this is easy to say in retrospect, I think like luck explains a lot in this world and in our lives, I think, right? And I think I got a little lucky picking that direction. But I think looking back, it was most certainly the right one. But it's a really good question because I see a lot of folks go after the athlete when they're starting to build a company, not knowing that there's not enough of a market in elite athletics to sell directly to the athlete. You're gonna have to go down market someday. There's not enough market to build, especially not a venture business, right? You can do a lifestyle business selling to elite athletes, but the market's really small, right? And you're gonna have to go down market eventually. So it's it's an interesting observation.
If I recall how many times I heard that the sports market is small from founders, it's probably a daily conversation I have. So that's crazy that you're mentioning it as well. So that's very interesting. So what have you done there? How early did you get customers for Notemeal?
Yeah, so the first year or so, the story sounded like this, right? It was of those 50 dietitians we talked to, I think we had identified about 10 that were like sentiment was high, the assumptions were clearly true for those end users, and there might be enough budget to swing this thing, right? So that's the last question is like, are you willing to put money into this thing? And I was a big believer, right? And again, putting the founder hat back on, right? When you're going to market, it's really easy to get people to sign up for new stuff, right? I'm guilty of this all the time. Hey, you want to try my new service? Sure. Like it's an email campaign service. I'll sign up for it. I'll log in once and I'll stop using it, right? I think when you're building the company and doing the founder-led sales process, right? Like you the most significant form of skin in the game, right, and getting customers to buy in and use your software is requiring some form of payment because oftentimes they're going to have to go ask somebody else for that money, right? So what we did is we talked to these dietitians and we said, hey, it's going to be $5,000 for a 1 year subscription to Notemeal. Right now, Teamworks Nutrition, and 45 dietitians said no, and 5 said yes, right? So we got 5 customers that were self-selecting for folks that wanted to put skin in the game, that were the innovators, right? And we launched with those 5 customers. It was Kansas University, it was Duke University, Purdue, Northwestern, and the Detroit Lions were our first NFL team, and that was a big one, right? Getting some validation that the NFL was willing to write a check that an NFL team was willing to write a check was a big one. So, and like any other story, we just focused on them, right? We didn't go try to get more folks on. We said these are our 5 early adopters. We're going to start with them. We're going to just get this product right. And for 6 months, again, you've been through this, right? It's like you're on the phone with them every day. Something comes up, you drop what you're doing, and at that point, it's just 2 of us, right? Both of us are technical. We're dropping what we're doing. We're going to fix their problem. We're shipping code. We're getting on the phone with them. We're saying, hey, does it work now? Or hey, is this more efficient, right? So it's just like, how many times can we possibly talk to them to iterate on this thing until it's to the point where we're pretty confident it's delivering value? And then the nice thing about elite athletics, right? It's a small market, but the sales cycle is very seasonal, right? So you basically in most leagues you get a shot at most leagues, right? So we basically had 9 months to get the product really tight, 6 to 9 months to get the product really tight. Then we had another shot to go back to the same folks we talked to and said, hey, I know we talked last time. Here's the product. It's much less of an MVP. It's much more of a must-have product now, right? Like, let's get your hands on it. And we went from about doing $50,000 in that first year to about, call it like a $250,000, $250K in recurring revenue in like the 6 months that followed. And then what happened was just again, like I think part of the game in entrepreneurship is staying alive long enough to get lucky, right? Like you hear a lot about this, and everyone gets lucky at different times. Like our luck came early, right? COVID happened, and what we saw was these NFL teams had to feed their athletes, right? But previously, as an athlete, you'd walk up and you'd scoop your mashed potatoes on your plate. You'd grab a piece of filet mignon off the hotline and you put it on your plate. You'd build your own plate. The NFL said, nope, we're putting sneeze guards up, and you guys got to hire cafeteria workers to serve the players themselves. And we said, wait a second, what if we build an ordering system, right, to allow the players to get onto their meal plans, to see the menus, and to build an omelet, for instance, that was dialed in on the carbohydrate front, dialed in on the protein front, and dialed in on the fat and calorie front, and fiber, omega-3s, right? Send the order into the kitchen just like you would like a Grubhub or a DoorDash, right? And the kitchen was basically printing tickets off. And we did this crazy thing where we built like a Bluetooth integration with printers. It was a POS system, right? We hacked it together in 6 weeks, launched it, and these kitchens, these NFL kitchens were transformed from like self-serve buffets to full-blown like POS-enabled cook-to-order kitchens. So we went to market hard with them, right? We called every NFL team, every college album. We said, hey, we have a solution for you guys, and it's not just a box check like the rest of the guys. We're actually gonna do you a service here. We're gonna help you get your nutrition education in front of these elite athletes while they're ordering their meals. And it was like the dietitians were like, let's go. This is incredible. It solves a pain point, and it's doing so in a value-add way that's better than the incumbent meal ordering solutions. So that was the big growth, right? Like some people don't hit that until year 7. Sometimes it's year 4. For us, it was like that year 2 where it really started to take off, and we saw significant adoption. So again, rather be lucky than good.
Super. And what would you say was the product journey all the way to the Teamworks acquisition? How did it change?
Yeah, it was for the next like you're saying through the acquisition, right? So like what happened? Yeah. So it was funny because I'll never forget it. Actually, while I was in the Patriots working for the team before Notemeal, right? Teamworks actually came and they demoed us, right? Corny Fisher and Corey Richardson, right? Shout out to you, like they're still Teamworks, incredible people. But the first time I saw them, Corey's our SVP of sales. He runs sales for the whole organization, and he was a part of the on-site. That's a big thing about Teamworks, right? Like tons of player coaches. Like how many times you see the SVP of sales of a 40-person company getting on site, right, trying to close a deal? It's just good stuff. So I was impressed when he came on site, and I remember then pitching the product, and they were talking about how they had a vision for building a platform, and all the rosters are managed in Teamworks Hub flagship product, right? So when a player gets traded, the first piece of software that gets impacted is Teamworks, right? That player will get removed from the roster, and they'll cease getting access to all of the forms, the schedule information, proprietary team PDFs, right? That'll just get shut off. So and I had a note in my notepad before I even had the Notemeal idea about, man, if I want to do something in the sports, in the elite sports space, right? It'd probably make a ton of sense to do some integration with Teamworks, because it feels like they've got the single point of truth for the roster, and the roster has the users, and the users, as you know, are the backbone for everything, right? So part of this transition and part of the way we underwrote the deal was like, man, if we could get our Notemeal users, right, just tied in with Teamworks users, that would allow us to take the schedule information, right? Teamworks is hosting all of these calendars of these high performers, right? And their days are stacked, man. They're like you, man. We're like CEO of a startup, right? You're back to back to back, and you're trying to find windows to do important things. And the dietitians are trying to do the same thing on behalf of the athletes. So we said, hey, let's take the calendars from Teamworks. Let's take the meal plan functionality in nutrition. Let's stitch the users together, and let's help those dietitians find time on the athlete's calendar so they can give pointed recommendations of when they should actually eat. Because I think like one of the big things that folks don't understand when they're outside looking into the performance space is that when it comes to nutrition, we're not trying to minimize calorie intake, right? We're not trying to reduce saturated fat intake. I mean, in most cases, right? We're not just trying to like cram protein after workouts. Like honestly, the biggest challenge, if you ask any dietitian, it's like making sure these guys and gals are eating enough, right? It's usually a caloric deficiency that we're trying to solve. And it's usually like a schedule logistics issue. It's these guys are so busy that sometimes they can't find time to eat. And when you look at college athletics, man, if you're sitting in a 3-hour biolab after practice and you don't grab food before, and you you do the level of activity you do, and you have the expenditure you have in practice, and you go an hour, 3 hours without eating, like that, you're totally putting your body at jeopardy, right? So it's always the simple things, not the complex things. We can talk about optimizing, omega-3 intake and polyphenols to reduce inflammation, but man, if you're not getting enough carbs after practice, like that's the problem that the dietitians actually want to solve. So it gets back to talking to users, right? So we underwrote the whole deal from a product strategy perspective with that focused integration kind of in mind. So that was like the first kind of thing we attacked, and went to market with it pretty hard.
That's super. So it sounded very obvious that working with Teamworks, it's super correlated with Notemeal. But in terms of the acquisition, like how were you thinking about it, and how did this come about? Was it very organic, would you say, or how did it happen?
Yeah. So yeah. So there are two-part question. I'll answer the first part first. When you think about the go-to-market kind of motion, right? You traditionally speaking, depending on like the school of thought you come from and what books you read, right? They're like lean startup, crossing the chasm, disciplined entrepreneurship is a great one by Bill Owlet that I read a lot of. Right, you got three different blockers in the purchase in the go-to-market cycle. Right, you got the IT buyer, the security buyer. You've got the end user buyer, who in our case was the dietitian, right? And then you got the economic buyer, right? The economic buyer in the elite athletic space is going to be your general manager. In some cases, your director of human performance, right? Who's got the budget? Who's actually writing the check? Who's signing the check, right? In the pro space, sometimes it's the head coach, but usually it's the GM. Collegiate, it's probably going to be the athletic director or the associate athletic director or the CFO, right? So that persona, we had no relationships with at all, right? What we were doing for the first 2.5 years of Notemeal prior to the acquisition, we were getting on the phone with as many dietitians as we could, and we were asking a dietitian to purchase this software, right? And we were getting 5 figures for an enterprise software contract for a 3-year subscription. And many of the dietitians said, I can't do this. I don't have the budget to do it, but I love it. I want it yesterday, right? And the deals die there, right? And you start to see this over and over and over again. When you look through HubSpot, or at the time we were using HubSpot or Salesforce, right? You see the closed loss and you're like, budget. And usually when someone tells you they don't have enough money to pay for something, there's usually another reason, right? However, this one was just so clear as day that we just didn't have the right economic buyer involved in the sales process. I mean, this is like tactical entrepreneurship stuff here, right? But like in the sales process, right? If you're demoing the dietitian and you're sending the dietitian a proposal, right? A lot of the deals will die there. And this applies to kind of any go-to-market motion, right? You need to involve the economic buyer aggressively. So like the conversation goes like this: Kyriakos, if you're the dietitian, right? I listen, Kyriakos, I'm so glad this is working out. It sounds like you need the software for these 3 reasons. I'd love it if you could help me, right? Help you. Can you go get somebody else who's got the budget, right, to get this deal done on the call, and I'll take them through the same demo. And some folks will get like offended by that, right? What do you mean I don't have the clout to get this done, right? And it's a tough thing. It's a tough conversation to have in some cases. So anyway, that's how a lot of these deals were dying early. So what happened with Teamworks is Teamworks has done such a great job delivering software for some 12 odd years, right? With those economic buyers, right? So your director of football operations, your athletic directors, your CFOs, right? They had the trust, they had the relationships, and we had the network to do this, right? So now all of a sudden, all these dietitians that said no before because they didn't have the budget to do it, it was a, hey, so and so, would you like to revisit this? And they said, yeah, sure. What's different now? And I said, well, what's different now is you're going to get a call from Mark Morris or Kevin Barefoot soon. We've talked to CFO. We've got a great opportunity to work together here. These products are integrated, and there's a trust between Teamworks and the financial buyer to get this thing done. Then you just see things start to work, right? Things start to click. So that was a bit of how that has worked out, and really that's what we're doing with the other products too. Is like we're only acquiring the best in class products, right? And when we make those acquisitions, we know if we make one of those acquisitions that are wrong or suboptimal, like we're going to erode trust with these economic buyers who we built a great relationship with. So we have to be really stringent on the vetting process during M&A. And also when we're building products internally, right? So it's all about preserving the trust with the economic buyer. That was part one. Part two was, how did that deal happen, Kyriakos, right?
Yeah.
So the conversation between Zach Maritas, founder, CEO at Teamworks. Zach's been running this almost since I've been alive. I'm kidding. He's like only 8 years older than me, but he's been at it for a while. He's also a Greek guy, Kyriakos. So Zach Maritas. Zach was pretty instrumental in mentoring me early, right? So he'd already been fighting this fight for 8 years, and the fight that I talk about here, he's been fighting for just innovation in the elite sports landscape, right? There are a lot of folks that weren't willing to invest, right, at a high enough level into. And when I talk about investments, I'm talking about like price points, right? There are a lot of companies that were in the space that were working with 5 clients that weren't charging a lot of money, and they'd be out of business in 3 years. What Zach has done an incredible job of is saying, here's the promise I'm going to make to you. We need a little bit of investment from you guys, but we're going to freaking deliver, and we're going to deliver for the next 30 years, right? So he's done a great job creating the market for enterprise SaaS and elite athletics. He caught me early through a connection. He was a Duke football alum. Our first hire on the dietitian side was Beth McCall. Beth ran sports nutrition at Duke for 5 years, overseeing the football team and the entire program. Beth was like, hey, there's this crazy Greek guy you got to talk to. His name is Zach Maritas. He runs this company called Teamworks. And I was like, Teamworks? Those are the guys that came and demoed us, the Patriots. So I said, sure. And I get on with Zach, and anyone who's talked to Zach, right? Just an incredible guy, incredible storyteller. He's been through so much, had such a cool journey, and he advised me early on like how to approach this whole thing. So we had a bit of a relationship there, and at some point we started to consider, as you've gone through, I'm sure, like, hey, do we go raise some money? We've got revenue to support an underwriting Series A. With the Series A, we're going to hire go-to-market and ramp that up and ramp up distribution because we've got good product market fit. And Zach said, well, wait a second. What if we distributed your software for us and there was a deal to be had here, right? And that was kind of where Kev Kush and Kev was my co-founder, where we had to make the decision, right? So we ultimately looked at, the size of the market, and there's still a lot of venture going into elite sports, and bringing this thing full circle. It's a really small market. So to do venture in elite sports, you have to have a really, you have to have a really compelling story externally, right? But you gotta be careful with that, right? Because as soon as you tell that story to a VC, they're thinking, where are you going to be in 7 years, right? And in my head, I'm looking at the space, I'm like, are we really going to get this thing to $100 million a year in revenue with just one product? And the answer is no. The answer is we're going to need to build more products, right? And distribute them. And then I'm like, well, wait a second. Isn't that what Zach's doing? And that's what he's offering here. So the conclusion for what the Series A would have to be was already being done by Zach. So if I say no to this, we're basically locking horns and competing, but we're not going to start competing for 5 years, right? So, and I'm overthinking this and overanalyzing, but that was what went into the decision-making process. And we did the acquisition. It was early. We had 5 employees, and it's been 3 years since, and it's been a really, despite all of the bad stories you hear about acquisitions going south, man, has this one gone well. Fortunate, lucky. It's all about the people there.
Super. And you join Teamworks, and what happens within the first few weeks?
Well, you pinch yourself. You're like, did I just sell my company? Like, what the heck? I feel like we just started the thing, right? So you have this moment where it's a big accomplishment for anyone who's been in the grind of building a startup, man. It's not like people aren't joking, right? No, people aren't embellishing, and they're staying and working 100 hours a week, and they're missing family parties, and they're not seeing their wife as much, and they're not spending time with their friends, and you go dark for the first couple of years. So this was like coming back for air, spent some time with my family, let it sit in for a couple of weeks. And then part of it was like, hey, what the heck do I do now, right? How am I going to attack this, right? And the problem shifts, right? You basically have to go from, as the founder, wanting to wear as many hats as you possibly can, right? To, hey, I've got all these great people I'm working with now. How do I get help, right? How do I get help, and how do I de-risk this thing in the grander scheme of things, right? So for the first 6 months we ran, my God, did we do a lot of demos. We honestly, we probably did about 100 demos in the first 6 months. We were doing like 3 or 4 demos a day with clients because, again, we had the relationships and the trust with the market. The demos got set up. We pitched the product, we demoed it, and there was a ton of interest. And like you could slowly see that like the hypothesis of the economic buyer meets the end user buyers community start to happen. And we started to grow really fast. And it was really, really exciting. And everybody that came in through that acquisition 3 years after, every one of the team is still at Teamworks, which I think is really incredible and fortunate. And we were very intentional to make sure everyone got taken care of and had really important jobs to bring the whole company forward. So that was like the first couple of days and months.
Super. But now you join an operating system when it comes to sports. So one of the things I'm very interested to hear is how did the products evolve over time? What kind of products do you have at Teamworks? And like historically, how did they evolve? And how does discovery work when you have so many products?
Yeah, man. It's a good question. So like a bit of a timeline here that I'd have to remind myself about once a week. We have gone from when we went through the acquisition 3 years ago, we had 3 products, right? We had Teamworks Hub, we had Influencer, right? Now Teamworks Branding and NIL, and we had Notemeal, right? Now Teamworks Nutrition, right? So those are the 3 products. That was just about 3 years ago. Today, we've got 16 products, right? So this has been, and it's funny, like what we just talked about, right? Like we've gotten so good at building relationships and integrating products together, right? We're just gonna keep doing that, and we're building this operating system for sports, and it's been really fun bringing it to life, right? So on the discovery front, the way you have to approach this, right, is like it becomes an org chart problem, and it's so fun. Anybody who's been a part of this, right, is like we're all in this thing together right now, and we basically got a squad for each product, right? And part of it is a resourcing question of, hey, what's the ideal makeup of a squad, right? And yeah, I mean, like Spotify is, I know we've all probably read like the ideal Spotify tribe concept and the squad concept and the right. So it's like this is almost a different problem. It's how do you got 400 people in the company? How do you optimally staff 16 product squads, right? Where some products are doing, 8 figures of revenue, and some products aren't doing 7 figures of revenue, right? So, yeah, it's like it's making sure we have directly responsible individuals, and we've got such great people in the product org here. And I can't speak highly enough. A lot of folks come from athletics, and they come with either a design and athletics background, or they're a former engineer that played sports in college. Like the context is really key to building software here. So yeah, the discovery process is like you'd imagine, right? Across those 16 products, a lot of those products have different end users, right? So like, for instance, we're building a strength and conditioning product right now, and we've got a big community of S&C coaches that we've engaged over the last 6 months. We've got the beta rolled out with 10 of them, and there's a product manager, Dan Duffield's doing a great job just working closely with that persona, right, to get that product dialed in and doing that independent of the rest of the company, right? That's Duff's project, get product market fit. That product graduates, moves into the go-to-market engine, and then we get as many hands on there as possible, and we spread the value, right? So that's essentially how we're approaching it. It's a decentralized product structure across each product, but everything's laddering up to the same. We're leveraging OKRs, and we're leveraging kind of best practices on that front.
Super. So I really like the bottom-up approach to reverse this. Maybe the question in terms of the customer. Let's say an NBA team that is using you right now, and I've seen Arsenal in terms of football, soccer in the US, of how they use you. But let's just take 2 examples of 2 teams that are using you, and like, what do they actually need? Like, what's the experience of the coach, of the player? What do they need?
One thing that we know they need that we're going to go deliver, right, is they need to go to less places, right, to get what they need, right? So if I'm a player, I want to go to one spot to access the stuff that I need to access. And the comparison I use internally sometimes is like we use Rippling for all of our HR and our payroll and our org chart and all of the people related, like the people department related things, right? And to me, like Rippling, I don't get super like jazzed about Rippling, but when I need to find something, I go to Rippling and it's all in one spot, right? And I think the reality is like that is a use case of athletes, right? They need to go to one spot to see what files have been shared with them, right? To see what's on their schedule, what's on their calendar, right? To see what tasks they have assigned to them by coaches, right? So that's kind of the painkiller, right? Like they have to do that. So we're gonna make it really easy for them to do that. What's been fun is working on some of kind of the vitamin use cases, right? Which are things like it's really all the human performance stuff. It's like what do these athletes actually want, right? Andrew and Trimble on our team came over through the Kairos acquisition. Andrew was a professional rugby player in the Irish Rugby Football Union for about 10 years. And he's familiar with just an incredible thesis for what players actually want, right? They want to introspectively look at their performance data. They want to do things like compare their data to other folks on their team, right? They want to take that data and maybe compare it to like what's the league look like, right? And how can they get better? So it's when you start to poke at the vitamin use cases, it gets really really fun. I think on the administrative side, it's a similar problem, right? It's like um, we essentially we service every. I mean, there are again 15 to 20 different departments in any of these athletic organizations. So what we're doing there is we're building purpose-built software for the workflows for each of those departments, right? So if I am the strength coach, I've got one place to go to access everything I need for strength and conditioning. It's a part of the operating system for sport, right? If I am the recruiting coordinator and I'm entering peak season for recruiting and talking to high school athletes, I know exactly where to go. I know what tool I need to use in the operating system to make sure I'm messaging my athletes and I'm wishing them a happy birthday and engaging them on social, while also utilizing my our compliance software to make sure we're not doing so at a time we can't, right? Same deal with a coach I'm just riffing off use cases here, right? Same deal with that coach who's scheduling a practice or a strength coach who's scheduling a workout, right? I need to make sure I'm in compliance with how many hours I have these athletes for, right? So all these pieces are integrated. Like there is a calendar behind all of this stuff, right? There are abstract entities that are stitching together all these point solutions. There's a calendar, there are tasks, there's a messaging system, there's a user profile, right? And having all those things in one spot is what makes up the operating system because all of those data points and those attributes are consistent across 16 products, right? And that's really where we're leveraging the network effect of having so many teams already in our ecosystem because we think long term, right? We can actually aggregate some of this data, right, and allow folks to opt into a give to get model, right? Where like they're sharing their data, we're anonymizing it 100% and aggregating it, but they can then compare their players' data to the aggregate data across their league, for instance. So that's a bit of a peek behind the curtain for like where we're headed. But those are some of the concrete use cases that are kind of trying to balance abstraction in concrete there, Kyriakos. But does that get at some of the question?
Yeah. So this brings me another two questions. The first is like, what learnings did you get from the go-to-market? Because I've seen over time that you expanded outside of sports as well. You went to the military. So what can we learn from that? And also, you touch a bit on data. I wanted to hear a bit more about the policy there. I know a lot of players that do not want to be sharing their data. So how do you approach that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think on the go-to-market side and the different markets you work with, right? We've been talking a lot about sports, right? About collegiate and professional sports, not just in North America, right? But also in EMEA, in APAC, right? We're growing kind of globally now, which brings its own set of new challenges on the focus side and the site reliability side. It's been really fun to attack. Um, the one area we haven't talked a ton about yet is the military, U.S. military space, right? And quite frankly, um, the international military space, right? And we've done a ton of work there, right? Because the reality is like when you define a market, how do you define a market, right? I think Bill Olet says this best in his book, right? A market is really can be defined by an employee leaving one job and taking the same job at another entity that exists in a different industry. And if that happens and there's lateral movement from employee to employee, like that's a market. And the reason is because you're benefiting from word of mouth, right? And that's the reality between the elite athletic space and the US military tactical spaces, right? You see a ton of these practitioners who are running performance departments, right, in the NFL. They'll leave and they'll go take a job with Special Operations Command as a head of human performance or as a dietitian. and vice versa, right? And because that's happening, right, that is defining a market. So what happened to us is when we started in collegiate and the NFL, we were naturally introduced to folks in the tactical space because folks had worked together, right? Like Rob Skinner comes to mind. Rob Skinner worked for the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee. He was lead dietitian for combat sports there, right? He goes and he takes a job within SOCOM, right? And he brings the product with him, right? Because he saw the impact it had with his folks, his boxers. He'd say, "Hey, let's use this thing with some of the special operators," right? So that's been really, really exciting and fun. And man, if you think the professional and the collegiate athletes are performing at a high level, I mean, like the stuff that they're doing, and the level of investment and care and impact that performance has in that space is just, it's totally unrivaled. You're talking about 35, 40-year-olds who are operating at an age of 20, right? Like it just every time I think about it or see it or work with these guys, it just blows me away. And one of the things we're trying to solve here is, right, unfortunately, as you guys know, in the government space, in the DoD space, it's just harder to work there, right? There's a level of bureaucracy, and it's there for a good reason, right? These guys are the security's there for a good reason, right? I think what we're hoping to see, and we've had some great conversations with some of our representatives on the Hill about this, right? We really need to see a global policy across the DoD for how military units can acquire, right? Can acquire wearable technology and software. And you're starting to see this with the US government partnering with Palantir on the FedStart program, right? You're starting to see reps from the DoD come out and state publicly that they know that it's been really hard to develop software for the DoD. And they know that we are falling behind other countries when it comes to our ability to innovate because of that, right? So there is an imperative, like there is a call to action to make that easier without sacrificing any of the security or due diligence. So it's really exciting to see that and see that movement start to happen and to support it. So I think there was a two-part question in there. That was the first one. Was there a second part, Kyriakos?
Let me ask it in a bit because it's very interesting to hear about defense in general. In the last podcast, I had Mike, who is the founder of Function Health, and he was in the Green Berets, and we had a nice discussion about this. But like, how does your go-to-market changes a lot when it comes to selling to defense and at the government? What would you want to see improved there?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, part of it is just general awareness, right? I don't think the problem is not at the end user level, right? The grassroots movement we're seeing across the entire human performance space is such that the strength coaches, the dietitians, right, the physical therapists, the athletic trainers, everyone who makes up that human performance team, whether it's the Army's H2F initiative, whether it's the Marines, whether it's SOCOM, right? Whether it's Air Force, right? Like they all know the benefit and the impact of these different technologies, right? They just don't have a clear path, right, to underwrite the investment, right? There's no way for them to go get funding, right? There's no way for them to go up the flagpole per se, right? And say, "Hey, brigade commander, we need funds for this specific type of technology." And what we're going to start to see is we're going to start to see some commanders say, "Hey, I understand the need for this, right? Because when I was 5 years younger and I was boots on the ground and deployed, I was using this technology. And it helped me sleep. It helped me recover. I felt a lot better and I was performing better, right?" There's going to be a natural increase in awareness. What I think we need to see, though, is a blanket policy for command to say, this is in line, for instance, with this section of the National Defense Authorization Act that says human wearables should be made available for the purposes of sleep or workout or accessing your strength and conditioning plan or accessing a performance nutrition meal plan, right? So I know that Congress is working on this, and I'm hopeful that it does hit, and we do give these units the opportunity to make that investment and to find that funding, because we're seeing huge impacts. Like the stories we've like literally observed firsthand, like we have intervened, right, because of data to stop what appeared to be, again, what appeared to be suicidal ideation, right? Like we have seen HRV drop, right? We've seen sleep drop. We've seen heart rate stay super elevated, and we've seen subjective wellness questionnaire data that suggests people are just super unhappy. And it's happening to one individual. And because we were tracking this data through a series of wearables and a Smartabase, now Teamworks AMS dashboard, right? That human performance commander was able to see, right, that data and actually intervene and have a conversation that, again, not to get dramatic, right? But like that conversation probably saved a life or a life that would have been in a much worse position if there wasn't intervention, right? So that's the stuff we're talking about, right? We're also talking about the Green Berets, right? I've got some close friend of my brother's who's like, he's been deployed down in Iraq, and we talk about the burn pits, right? You hear a lot about folks just shooting just ammunitions exposure all day and the lead exposure they're getting. Like a lot of the stories we hear from dietitians is we're just trying to get more antioxidants and more vegetables inside of these bodies and to supplement them appropriately to help to bind to some of those heavy metals, because you're getting lead exposure through shooting guns all day, and also from like the trucks overseas, right? It's cheaper to buy unleaded gas, so to buy leaded gas, so we burn leaded gas when we're outside of the country, and we're breathing in lead all day. Like, so there are just a ton of opportunities and use cases. There's a strong reason why these practitioners are hired and why they're intervening, but they need technology, right, to increase their reach. They need a force multiplier, and that's where these wearables come in, right? That's where folks like Tarek just have done such a great job wrapping up all that data into one spot. So tools like Teamworks AMS can pull that data into one dashboard for commanders to see and interface with that data. And I'm really excited about where it's headed. We just got to go faster.
That's I've never heard such a use case before. Can we go a bit there? How does the dashboard work? How do you use the health data from devices, wearables, sensors? Um, can you give us an idea there?
Yeah, totally. So again, part of the battle here, right, is the lay of the land right now. Is the default case is you're if you're wearing, I'll name a couple of brands, like if you're wearing a ring or a watch to measure your heart rate or your heart rate variability or your sleep, right, or your activity in general, right? That data is usually getting access in that brand's portal, right? But that company is a hardware company, right? Some of them have done an incredible job building consumer-facing applications, right? And like I'm a user of Aura. I love my Aura mobile app. But you know who doesn't love the Aura mobile app, right? Is that I shouldn't say they don't love it, because most of the e-performance leaders are loving what Aura is doing, right? But you know who doesn't love the inability to access their team members' data, right? Is folks that are in these leadership positions across performance, right? So if I'm a leader of human performance, I simply want a dashboard, right, to see all of the data from the different wearables that I've deployed to my team, to my unit, to my brigade. And I want the ability to see individual profile data, right? But see the holistic picture. I want to see their expenditure. I want to see their acute to chronic load, right? I want to see their sleep data. How are they recovering, right? What's going in and what's coming out? But I also want to aggregate that at the team level, right? I want to find outliers. I want to see if I'm pushing the gas too hard as a strength coach working with a football team. And I also want to compare that across many teams, right? In the hierarchical case of, again, a military command, right? So that is what we're doing on the dashboard case. We're also setting up alerts, right? And those alerts might be things as simple as, hey, if sleep drops below 6 hours for 3 days straight, and acute chronic load exceeds X or Y tomorrow or on that day, then the red alert gets raised, and we're helping practitioners sift through the information to go then intervene, right? So it's really about the aggregation and then using the aggregation to set up alerts. And again, where the whole industry is going and the disruptive changes in AI, right? Like we've totally done some predictive modeling stuff, right? But I think where it gets really fun is you're basically with the open source LLM models, provided they're done in a secure enough context, right? That's the big asterisk. They have to be done in secure context. You're basically talking about 2 years of otherwise dev work, right? You can do 2 years of work in 2 weeks with these models and with these APIs. It's just totally incredible. It's commoditizing the model building, right? Every company, every product's going to have and you're already seeing it, right? But every company has an AI version. It's just sitting on top of OpenAI stuff, right? And it's incredible, right? It's really changing the landscape, specifically from a development velocity perspective. You can just get those features out faster, test them faster, iterate on them, and make them better, and just create more value. So that's really what we're talking about when we talk about dashboards and wearable integrations.
Super, super. I wanted to ask you two last questions. You mentioned about expansion into other continents as well, and I wonder, how do you build the sales organization internally when you have the US teams and the military, but then teams in Europe, for example. So, what can founders and executives learn from you from this aspect?
The short answer is, one thing we've done a great job of is finding folks in the go-to-market department, right? Departments that have had experience as practitioners and oftentimes are former users of the software that we've rolled out, right? And in doing so, we bring the inherent context into the sales process. Like we also don't always hire like career sales professionals, right? We've done taken a unique approach here and brought in practitioners and coached. They got to be the right people, right? We coach them up to take on sales leadership roles with the context and the domain expertise, not only in that sport or in that department, but also in that region, right? So like we are 100% global, right? We are remote first. We do have an office in Durham. We have an office in Ireland. We have an office in Colorado, in Australia, right? Number of different footprints. But again, because we're remote, when we talk about APAC expansion, right? Like Simon leads up our APAC territory as the general manager. I just boots on the ground in Australia because like that's probably the right way to do it. He understands that space better than me, right? Or better than anybody that has grown up in the US and doesn't understand the culture, right? Gareth, who came over from the Kairos acquisition, is currently leading the EMEA go-to-market team, right? As the GM, right? As the territory GM, we call it. And when you look at, there are just cultural differences between the US and some of the not between the US and the UK, and between the UK and France, between France and Ireland, right? So having someone who's closer to those cultural differences is great. It's funny, like we talk about the US compared to some of the Australians, and in the US, we're much more aggressive with the sales motion, and the buyers are much more, they're used to the aggressive sales process and the constant consumerism and being hit with ads all day. Like if you try to run that point in Australia, people are like, why are you jamming this thing down my throat, man? Like, why don't we have a beer first and like chat about it first? It's been fun. You gotta find, it's just more efficient to find people that understand the region, understand the domain, and have them lead the go-to-market motion in that area.
I always ask the guests for the last question, if you look backwards 100 years in the future, what would you say that it's really wrong in the space of sports?
It's related to sports, right? I think what's right in sports is that you have a team, right? A cross-functional, multidisciplinary team that is responsible for taking care of the athletes that are invested in their overall wellness and that are ultimately focused on getting them to perform at a high level, right? And that's what's right about sports. What's wrong about the general consumer population is that we don't have access to that, right? I think my biggest personal gripe is that primary care is broken, right? The healthcare system is broken, right? Medical schools and the medical system in the U.S. and many other countries, right, are incentivizing folks, medical doctors, to take on specialty roles. And clearly there was a need for that. The market solved it. So we've got these high-paid specialists, right? It is really hard to find a primary care doctor. But when you get a primary care doctor, oftentimes you're going to see a primary care doctor when it's already too late, when you're already subject to the downstream effects of not taking care of your metabolic health. And when we talk about metabolic health, man, like all that is to stay metabolically healthy, you're basically doing all the things that these athletes are doing, right? It's just so simple, right? And there's not enough education. There's not enough significance or emphasis put on preventative medicine, right? All that is you sleep good, you're active. You don't eat too much. You eat within reason, right? You spend time with your friends. You spend time with your family. You don't stress yourself out too much. And if you do those things right, like we're not even you're never going to see a specialist, right? You're going to take care of your own health. So I would love to see the world start to embody how athletes are treating human performance and just have that brought and trickled down into the general consumer population. And maybe the answer there is to leverage the athletes as role models to get consumers to wake up to the fact that by making these very simple decisions and choices earlier in their lives, that they can do things like Peter Attia talks about, right? Where you can pick up your grandkids when you're 80, right? Or you can avoid diabetes and pre-diabetic states when you're 65, right? And you're still able to cognitively process things when you're 90, right? It's not just the health span. It's not just the lifespan, it's the health span. And I think the world would be a much happier place. We'd all be more efficient, and we spend way less money on downstream effects of not taking care of our bodies if we were to adopt this holistic human performance mentality out the gate. So that's my opining. We got to figure out how to make that happen.
Super, Sean. Super insightful conversation. Thank you so much.
Here, August. Thank you, man. And keep up the good work. You're doing God's work over there, man. It's a big problem to solve, and fired up to follow along.